All right, everybody. Well, thank you all for joining. I want to be respectful of everybody's time and we'll get started here. This webinar will be recorded, so we'll be able to circulate it after the fact. But we're going to take a little bit of a non-standard approach for this one. I'm going to treat this a little bit more like a podcast interview. So I'll be sharing my screen, as you can see now, but we'll switch in and out of that for the purposes of the conversation between Andy and I. So by way of introduction, my name is Chris Boyd. I serve as the VP of Product here at Trunk Tools. I've been with the company for almost 2 years now. Super excited to talk more with Andy today, coming from Gilbane. So Andy, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Andy Roy, superintendent with Gilbane Building Company. Been in the industry for coming up on 10 years now. Worked on everything from mixed-use developments, large-scale towers, heavy mechanical projects, and convention centers, which is what we're going to be speaking about today. Been using Trunk Tools, Trunk Tech's product for a little over a year now, and we've had great success with it. So excited to share with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I'm excited to unpack a little bit. Obviously, AI has been all the buzz in the industry right now. And so specifically, we're going to focus on how do we use AI in the context of construction? How can that save time, prevent rework? So we'll dialogue about that. But before we dive in, I'm going to show a quick video and then we'll go from there.
Hey, I'm pouring the 6th floor deck, but I don't see any plumbing sleeves. You sure I got the latest drawings?
Just hang on. I have the level 6 sleeve drawings on my desk.
What do you mean, hang on?
I'll be right there. I'll meet you up on 6.
Hope you got that core drill ready.
All right. Well, while the point of the video is to be a bit humorous, Andy, is that a pretty good snapshot of what a day in the life looks like for you?
I can attest to that. As we were watching the video, my phone was doing something similar, blowing up over here. So yeah, that is the day in the life of a superintendent, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I guess the good news is that there's some potential solutions out there. And by the way, I recognize you're on an active construction job site today, so I'm sure we're going to hear some sounds behind the scenes, which is totally fine. It fits the mood, which is great.
That's right. We are raw and unfiltered here. So
Love it. So I know we're going to be talking a lot about this project that you're working on, the Baird Center project up in Wisconsin, which is beautiful, by the way. Can you give us just a little bit of an overview of what the project was about, what all you were building specifically, and your role, and then we'll dive in?
sure, absolutely. So the Baird Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin is a $456 million convention center expansion. There was an existing convention center that we actually built onto the north side of. We're talking 5 stories here, a massive ballroom, over 30 plus meeting rooms, a large atrium, and underground parking as well. It took place over the course of about 2.5 years, from foundations all the way to finishes, and finished up in early 2024. So extremely challenging project, a ton of documents, a ton of interfacing and coordination, and a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you mentioned documents. I think in reviewing my notes here, we pulled over about 34 gigabytes worth of data, over 21,000 files, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of information. I'm sure you memorized all of that for while you're building it.
Yeah, I can guarantee I didn't. Right.
This won't come up in your annual review, I promise.
Perfect.
So I'm curious, and I'll just kind of stop sharing my screen here. As far as timing, like where were you at in the life cycle of the project when our platform specifically was introduced?
So we were kind of working our way out of structure and enclosure, getting the building watertight and moving our way into interior finishes when we brought your team on and started to use Trunk Text on the project. We saw a lot of great productivity Options with coordinating and interfacing with the interiors build out, stud framing, overhead mechanical, so on and so forth. Honestly, Chris, all the way into commissioning as well. So it kind of ran that entire length of the project for us.
Got it. Okay. And then, as far as who all was involved, I know obviously you were an active part of this and then members of your team. Can you talk a little bit about the roles of the individuals on the job site who were interfacing with the system?
Sure. So I took lead on rolling out trunk text on our project. I also had 4 other engineers that were underneath me as direct reports, and we brought them on to kind of test out the product and then really start using it and then start pounding it with questions. Some of the engineers were newer, about a year, 2 years out of college. We had some that were a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more experience in the mechanical world. So we got good input from them as well. But and then we had a couple new people that joined the project as well that didn't have all the background from day one groundbreaking, that were able to use this tool to dig up old documents, dig up old RFIs, old correspondence, and help them generate context to the decisions that they're making.
Awesome. And I want to drill in on some of the specifics here in a minute. Before I do, I want to flash this up on screen. We had done a study talking to PMs, superintendents like yourself and others on the job site to try and understand, where is the time going? What is the time being spent on? And so I'm kind of curious, when you look at this, what was surprising to us was, for example, this section on the project management system searching, how much time is spent. Does that align with your experience on this job or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say we're right in that ballpark of that metric right there. As much as we use Procore, which is the PMS software that we use it on a day-to-day basis for almost everything that we do. Honestly, the search function in Procore and having to turn on filters, turn off filters, dig through different modules, it became cumbersome, and we were not getting the information that we needed in the efficient manner that we were looking for. So PMS searching was a huge constraint for us on the project.
Yeah. And I imagine when you think about what got you into construction in the first place, and you look at something like this of time spent searching for information, drafting RFIs, building procurement logs, I imagine that's not what got you excited about construction in the first place. Am I off base?
You are not off base with that. I got into construction to pour concrete, erect steel, build on interiors. I did not want to be a document manager. I did not want to have to be searching for documents, revising documents, pushing documents back and forth. That just didn't do it for me. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but it doesn't do it for a lot of people that I work with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive into some of the specifics, I just want to talk briefly about the implementation process. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of data here. You mentioned earlier using Procore consistently. We integrate into Procore and pulled all that information over so that you could start using the system. What was your perspective on the time frame, roughly, from when we started having conversations about this project specifically to when you were able to actually get in and start using it?
Honestly, Chris, the integration process was relatively seamless. I think all of us on our team and company wide were impressed at how quickly and efficiently you integrated into Procore. I think we were up and running within a couple days at that point. And we were able to easily turn on and off modules that we wanted to extract different data sets from. So it was very seamless integration. We were able to hit the ground running within a couple days.
Great. Awesome. Well, I want to now kind of go into some of the nuances of how you use the system specifically, because again, everybody has this different perception about how AI specifically can add value in the context of construction. I'll flash up on screen some kind of video recordings we did of some of the interactions that you had with the system. I'd love it if you could give everyone some kind of voiceover on what exactly triggered some of these things, and maybe even a little bit of insight into what would it have looked like to go and find this information in a manual sense through different systems. So I'll share my screen here. And I think this first example was all tied to this kind of manufacturer approved cure time for the glazing sealant. Can you kind of walk us through what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so this question came up when we were on the east side of the building. We were working with the glazing contractor, trying to figure out the approved cure time for the glazing sealant that he was putting on. We were trying to schedule a water test on the east facade. I was getting an answer from the contractor that I didn't generally believe based on prior experience, and wanted to make sure that he was giving me the correct line based off his product data and the specified product. So what could I do? I could go to Procore, dig in specifications, get down to Division 7 or openings division and start finding the information. But I decided to open up trunk text, just right on my tablet at that point in time. I'll hop right in there, type the question in, ask what the manufacturer approved cure time was for the glazing sealant. It was able to pull up both the spec and the product data within seconds, and then takes me to the page inside of the product data and the specification, which then I was able to call his bluff on that. Right. So the cure time was technically 14 to 21. They're saying something different, and
Yep.
we weren't in the position to deviate from the specification product data and didn't want to take on that risk. So that was a very easy response for us, saying, nope, this is what we're doing and this is what we're working off of.
Got it. Okay. And then on the back side of that, you get the information out in this case that you needed. It
Mhm.
looks like you have this kind of follow-on interaction about trying to understand in anticipation of an inspection or otherwise. Can you walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so we were able to come up with that June 8th test date from our P6 schedule. This was kind of a validation question, kind of asking the question in a different manner. So we asked that, if we have to do this water test on June 8th in order for all the follow-on successor activities to continue, when do we need to have all these gaskets done by? And it gave us that May 18th date there, which ties back to the specification and product data. Then able to use that date just to validate that contractor is either ahead or behind schedule at that point in time, which he was very close. So I was able to work with him to get manpower on site accordingly, staff that up, and maintain our dates. This just provided it provided the framework in the background, the background evidence for me to be able to craft that argument that, hey, we need more manpower here. This is the date that you have to hit if we want to get this water test done.
Got it. Yeah, and I know that on the job site, it can be different when you're having these interactions in the context of you're in the trailer getting a phone call versus walking the field. In this instance, was this a situation where you're out in the field answering the question or arguing, if you will, with the subcontractor? Or...
Yeah. In this sense, it was an argument. Granted, it was amicable as could be, but yeah, this is definitely a field conversation tool. At this point in time, I didn't have the P6 schedule. Our P6 schedule was 150 pages. I didn't have it saved down to my tablet PDF. And even if I did, what am I going to do? Search through the P6 schedule on my tablet, which can be cumbersome. This just offered a very quick and efficient means for me to get the date that I needed in a timely fashion.
Got it. And I want to move on to some other examples because I think that AI and its manifestations in construction often get kind of pigeonholed into, oh, you can use it to just ask a very specific question. And I think what's been really interesting in observing how you're using the system and others are using the system is that it actually helps accelerate workflows that you are going through on a daily basis, whether it's you're arguing or professionally and courteously discussing something with a subcontractor, or if you're talking about accessing schedule information. And so we have this example here I thought was interesting where you were interacting with the system and trying to get information about the schedule specifically. So can you talk through that interaction?
Yeah, this was another one that kind of ties back to our P6 schedule, as you mentioned. So in this case, I was actually out in the field. I was covering for a superintendent that was off for a couple of weeks, and he was in charge of the stair cores. I didn't have any work inside of the dozen stair cores that we had across this entire project. So I wasn't really in tune with the schedule that he was running. So this, a couple of trades came up to me. They had questions. They were fighting over who's supposed to be in the stair, finishing their work. Someone else was trying to get in there. And I was like, all right, well, let's just take a step back, see who's supposed to be in there. Again, what do I do? Search through the 150-page P6 schedule on my tablet and hope that, that's OCR, then I can actually find where I need to go. Or do I ask trunk text, pull the dates from the specific stair core that I asked for? And as you can see, within 5-10 seconds here, I was able to get all of the activities that were going on during that time frame and use that to kind of mediate what needed to happen in the field.
Yeah, awesome. And I know that, construction schedules, I think for those who are really familiar with large commercial construction projects, that they know how arduous and long these things can be. But then also, not everybody on your job site has a P6 license, right? So some folks only have access to the PDF versions of these schedules, correct?
Great. Yep.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. So hopefully making that more accessible was useful. And then kind of taking that a step further here, supporting documentation to know where the information is coming from is kind of a key pillar, if you will, of the system. Would you say that for you and your team, when you're interacting with the system, trying to get information out, that checking to see the source is kind of a consistent activity for you?
I would say almost every time, more often than not, we are always checking the documentation that it is pulling the response from. I think it just speaks to that human in the loop, right? We know the project better than the system's going to know the project, even though the system might know the documentation better than we might. But we know what's going on in the field. We know the general flow. We have a pulse on what needs to be happening. So there's always that human element that's back checking the information. You're exactly right, Chris.
Awesome. Well, and when you consider, and before we walk through this other example, the way that you think about the value that software provides in general, ROI can be measured in a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's time saving, sometimes it's preventing rework, and we're going to go through an example, I think, that addresses that. But I'm curious, like for you, when you're making decisions, since you're having to make so many decisions out in the field on a daily basis, do you feel like you are more confident as a result of having access to the information as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The last thing that I want to do is make a decision based on obsolete or incorrect information, or information that I just don't have at all. So yeah, having access to the most accurate, up-to-date information is critical for my role.
Awesome. Yeah, and tied to the most accurate and up-to-date information, we hear from a lot of folks that when they're out in the field and they're answering something, they're kind of thinking in the back of their minds, what am I missing? Did I not know about an RFI, et cetera? And I think this example that where you were dealing with this fireplace and ceiling, I would love to hear you unpack a little bit the dynamics around the specific scenario, and specifically how it helped prevent a situation that could have created some expensive rework or waste on the project.
Absolutely. So this is again on the east side of the project. We had a massive feature wall, 120-foot tall. It was all acoustic plaster, material sourced from Europe, long lead time, so on and so forth. We had a very custom fireplace that we needed to install, and it had a flue vent that ran up behind this feature wall and discharge out the side of the building. So this is like at the 9th hour, we're doing our in-wall inspection as it normally goes. And the drywallers champing at the bit to start putting rock on the wall. And I'm walking through there with a couple of the trades, making sure we're all good inside the wall. And we're looking, and again, it's that human element, that gut feeling. We looked at the flue vent and we're like, are we sure that that's right? Because if we close this wall up, there's no way that we are getting back inside of that wall without a lot of money and a lot of time. So what we noticed is that some of the seams, or all of the seams on the vent for the fireplace, were not sealed. This specific product, it was a non-sealed B vent, and we wanted to just be sure that we did not need to seal it, because we didn't see anything to date in the drawings that required for this. So what did I do? First thing I could have done is start searching through the 30-40 documents that had some sort of interface with this fireplace, tangentially. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't have time. The drywallers were right there. So I typed the question into trunk text, and within 10 seconds, again, I had this response here saying, yes, according to the provided document, all pipe and elbow joints in the fireplace vent ductwork must be sealed. So immediately I'm like, okay, where did it find this information? And as you see here, you can click right into this is actually an ops and maintenance manual, an O&M manual that we generally wouldn't reference for in the field for construction. I mean, half the time you're getting your O&M manuals during closeout.
Sure.
So it's honestly miraculous that we had this O&M manual at this point in time.
Yeah.
And then also miraculous that we asked the question here. So it obviously came up with the answer saying in bold down there that we needed to tape and seal all the joints,
Mhm.
or the flue might not pull enough vacuum to open the damper and allow the fireplace to exhaust and ignite. So immediately we get on the line with the fireplace manufacturer and we talk to him about his product data, say, hey, yeah, is this absolutely necessary given the product that we used? And they're to no surprise, their response is yes, absolutely. We will not warranty your fireplace if you do
Mhm.
not tape all of these seams.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a big deal at that point in time. We had scaffold all the way up 100 feet in the air in front of this plaster wall.
Mhm.
Scaffold was coming down shortly, so we needed to get on that scaffold immediately and tape up all the seams and then get that documentation back to the fireplace manufacturer to say, hey, this is not an issue anymore. This is all done.
Yeah.
Had we had not done this and the fireplace didn't ignite, we would have been re-erecting scaffolding all the way
Mhm.
100 feet up, tearing off our European acoustic plaster, getting behind there, taping it, and then having to redo all that plaster work. I mean, we're talking six-figure costs here, and we're talking well over a month delay, and that's not even including the lead time for the material, because
Right.
I don't even know how we'd quantify that at this point. But
Right.
yeah, it really provided value in this specific instance.
Interesting. Okay, that's super helpful. And I know in this kind of follow-on example, you as you're working with the trades and communicating with them specifically, that they're the ones obviously that need to go back and seal this up.
Mhm.
The translation element of the system was helpful. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Absolutely. So the manufacturer or the installer that we were using, our mechanical contractor, didn't speak the best English.
Mhm.
Things were kind of getting lost in translation. So what we did is we kind of flexed the translation power in here and say, hey, can you give a response in Spanish? And we were able to easily, within a couple seconds, it translated everything, and we just show him the tablet, and he was able to read it and say, yep, absolutely, I completely understand, and got his guys over there and got to work. So there was nothing lost in translation on that, which was extremely powerful.
That's great. Yep. Love it. And we've thanks to your feedback, I know we'll talk about this more later, but from you and others hearing that the translation piece is really important. We've also
Mhm.
made changes to the system such that if it's a Spanish speaker, for example, using it and they ask a question in Spanish, it will by default respond in the language that the user's asking the question in. So hopefully that continues to help there, because we don't want that to be a barrier on these job sites. But yeah, I think what's so interesting to me about rework and waste on construction job sites, which we know is a significant issue, we know it's a big budget line item, and there's some of it that just can't be prevented, but that there are opportunities like this where just presenting the right information to the right people at the right time helps prevent some of those things. So I appreciate you unpacking that. I think moving on though to another example of where I think this could fall in both categories, right? Of helping prevent rework potentially, but also kind of safety and concerns from that perspective. You had this beautiful flow sculpture at the Baird Center project, and you had asked these questions tied to rigging. Can you walk through what you were needing and why you needed that information?
Yeah, so in the atrium, as Chris mentioned, we kind of had this massive hanging art piece. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars, custom art piece fabricated by some artists from across the world. Our attachment for this art piece was back to the structural steel above. We had to drop support tubes down and put rigging eyes on them, and each rigging eye would pick up a cable that supported this piece of artwork. So I was walking through the field one day, and I noticed, I was like, I knew what the sculpture looked like. I was like, I don't think we have enough rigging points up there for this art piece. So I was like, all right, let's just ask the question. It's that easy. It hardly takes any time. I asked the question when I was out in the field. I didn't really have a good understanding of the drawing because it was provided by the owner and their vendor. And sometimes in the construction world, we don't really see those drawings.
Mhm.
But in this case, I knew that there was something out there that existed. I just didn't know where to find it. So I asked the question, and it easily, within seconds, pulled up the artwork drawing with each respective rigging point. And it pulled the quantity of rigging points from that table that you see right there in front of us. So the count that I had in the field was something along the lines of 18, 19 that we had up in the air at that point in time. I think in total there, Chris, there were 23 rigging points.
Yep.
So immediately red flag, right? Steel contractor they move on to something else. So I had trades working from in a flow from the north to the south, working underneath this area since it is, 150 feet in the air. So at that point in time, I was able to just reach out to the steel contractor and show him the discrepancy, say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what you have in the air. Where's the disconnect? Simple human error for this one.
Sure.
But it allowed me to have the conversation at that point in time prior to a lot of the finish work proceeding and work underneath them proceeding as well. So I was able to then sequence this accordingly to get them back up in the air, get the rest of the rigging points installed before trades started working underneath them, creating safety hazards, which is the last thing that any of us want on a project.
Yeah, you're making me think twice about walking underneath these large chandeliers and art sculptures in these different event spaces.
I guarantee you the factor of safety on this, Chris. You have nothing to worry about.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. And then with this specific example, I know that there were interactions that went further than that around trying to understand clearances and things. So can you walk through that?
Yeah, there were. So as a part of the conversation with the steel contractor to get back up there was a question on how on the actual length of the cables that were hanging from there, because that set that elevation for him to put his rigging point to. So very quick and easy for me to just ask the question in here. It actually pulled the dimension from an elevation view inside of the drawings, which we could have spent 5-10 minutes going through it, but instead we were able to just easily type the question in, pull up the exact page that we need to get to right here, zoom in there, see our 45 feet, and then it actually gave us the erection sequence of how this sculpture was going together as well, which was beneficial to how they were installing their work.
Yeah, got it.
So and to that point, it's either I sit there as the superintendent and really study these drawings and try to come up with it myself, or hop in the model and try to come up with the sequence myself. But I was, this is very easily able to give me that framework, give me the bones of how this thing's coming together. And then me as the human in the loop, I'm able to very quickly and easily just validate that information and then disseminate it as needed.
Yeah, got it. That's super helpful. And I think it's interesting that in some of the use cases we went through, which I know were just a subset of the many interactions that you had in the system, that you've got some that were just about simply finding information, others that had to tie into preventing rework and preventing waste, others that were other people asking you questions where you're having to turn around and field those answers and provide them back. So there's lots of different use cases here. So I think it's really interesting, and it's been fascinating to see you use it. We also had an individual the other day use it in a way that was new for me. One was they basically had finished framing and rough ends, and they were getting ready to put sheetrock up. But they kind of asked the question, like, what are all the things that we need to make sure are complete before we start sheetrock? And the system output the answer, but then they asked it to generate a table with that list of items with an additional column with a checkbox next to each, so they could print it out and somebody went and actually checked to make sure everything was complete first. So it's not something we told them to do, just kind of another interesting way that folks are using the system on the job site.
I agree, Chris. I mean, even to that point, I used it the other day to develop a pre-installation meeting agenda for a specific trade on site. So I gave it the trade that the trade that I wanted, and then I gave it some rough outlines of, hey, I want to see any relevant specifications, relevant details, any safety information, MSDSs, and it was able to actually assemble the agenda for me in agenda format, which I was able to just easily, quick and easy, just copy it over, print it out, run it to my meeting, and I was good to go.
That's awesome. Yeah, and this is one of the things I tell folks about building software like this. It's that there are things that the system can do we don't necessarily give it credit for until folks like you and others stress test it and push it in different ways. We had a another user the other day that was using it for the purposes of contract review to make sure they knew all the notices they needed to provide to the owners in certain situations. And then another one I really, really liked, tied back to contract review, but essentially they kept a daily log of the amount of rainfall on the job site and had, for over a year, basically had that record, and asked the system to provide a list of every day where the rainfall had exceeded 1/4 of an inch, and then identify every corresponding day where they hadn't provided a report back to the owner about that rainfall exceeding that amount, because that was a contractual obligation. And so the system was able to find all of those and say, hey, here are the 5 situations where this wasn't reported. So just really interesting to kind of see how it can be incorporated into these different workflows on a daily basis.
That's actually genius. We have a similar requirement for temperature and humidity inside the building. So I just learned something new here today. I think I'm going to be using that for temp and humidity inside the building now too.
Love it.
That's awesome.
Love it.
I did have a good one. I had a good one the other day too.
Yeah.
We were working on stenciling and stickering fire rated penetrations and fire rated walls.
Okay.
Above ceilings before above ceiling inspection. And I wanted to get an email out to all the trades saying, hey, this is your responsibility to get this done. If you need to get back above the ceiling hard lid for any reason, you are responsible for any costs for tearing out ceiling and replacing. So I actually asked the system to pull the information from the specification, our fire safety and fire stopping specification. And then it actually pulled up it pulled up the exact wording that needed to be up there. And then I asked it to generate a form email to all my trade contractors requesting them to get the work done by X date. Typed up the email for me, copy, paste, added a little human touch to it, sent it out, done. It was
Love it.
very, very impressive.
That's awesome. Glad to hear it. Yeah, which is a good segue into kind of where we see this going. And I know we've talked a lot about agents kind of online from a marketing perspective, some of the things we've been building. I know you've started playing with them. And just to provide a little bit of voiceover for those listening in, the whole concept here is how do we take some of these things that occur on construction job sites on a regular basis and introduce some degree of automation that hopefully takes some of those manual steps out of the process. And we describe those as agents. And so we've launched a schedule agent, which I know Andy has been using and testing a little bit. We also have custom agents that can help with meeting prep or contract review in the example I gave earlier. So Andy, I know you've been one of the kind of early adopters of agents and have been giving us some feedback. Can you give me a little bit of a sense of like what you're seeing there with those custom agents and the ways you're using it and the opportunity that you see associated with that?
So I think a little background on the agent, the way I have it set up is it sends me essentially look ahead activities for the forthcoming week or 2 weeks, whatever I dictate. And when I get that text, I am able to open that up. It provides dates of forthcoming activities, and then it also provides relevant documentation that I'll need to reference for those activities. What I've been finding, which is providing value, is sometimes I'm missing the documentation that I need for these specific activities. For example, if I'm building a CMU wall in 2 weeks in the basement, I would expect that I would have reinforcing shop drawings reviewed, submitted, reviewed, approved, showing all the openings and anything that I need. In some cases, in one case, I noticed I don't have the right reinforcing shop drawing for this wall, which then spurred the conversation with the project engineer, field engineer that's in charge of that information, who then reaches out to the subcontractor to see, hey, where's this information at? So it's really helping us get ahead of the game in some cases and helping us catch up in other to make sure that we're covered from a risk standpoint. We have the documentation that we need in place and we can go out there and build it. So, very powerful.
That's interesting. Yeah, we've been kind of kicking around this idea that right now a lot of the value that the platform provides is around providing access to information quickly. But in the use case you just described, it's the absence of information that becomes valuable, because now you know where to double click, who to go talk to shore it up, which is a really fascinating use case. Tying that back to the visual that we were looking at earlier in our conversation, we've been thinking about agents as a way to progressively take some of these chunks of the pie chart and automate portions of it. And so this slide even starts to illustrate some of this, that we want to make the submittal review process easier, comparing it back to specs. We make it easier to create RFIs, easier to build procurement logs. All of these we see as potential agents that can help automate a large percentage of this pie chart. And I'm curious, if you, Andy, were given more time back in your day in some of these specific areas, what do you think that would mean for the benefit of the job? Like, what would that mean for you if you reflect on the Baird Center project? What do you think that would have enabled you to do and how your time was spent that would have been better for you and for the project as a whole?
It's a good question, Chris. I think the time that I'm tied up searching for documentation, I obviously need to be using elsewhere on the project. I need to be out in the field, boots on the ground, sequencing, working with trades, making sure that we're maintaining proper flow, making sure that we're hitting dates. Quality is a huge part of that. I'm out in the field making sure that the work that we're putting in place conforms to the specifications, conforms to owner requirements and owner desire.
Yeah.
I don't need to be searching for documentation, trying to get answers. I don't need my project engineers searching for documentation. They need to be right next to me out in the field, doing this with me. This product just offered maximum efficiency for us to get to the right documentation. Another major role for a superintendent on the field is safety. I don't need to be head down in my iPad, scrolling through documents, trying to turn on filters in Procore, turn them off, type in different keywords, trying to get to the document that I need. I know what I need to get to.
Yeah.
I just simply need to verbalize that or type that into trunk text, and it pulls up the document for me. I'm spending less time head down in the iPad, more time eyes up, making sure that trades are tied off, making sure that they're doing work appropriately, doing work safely, and maintaining proper flow and sequence.
Love it. Yeah. And obviously that's where you're needed. That's why our whole motto is, let builders build. We want you to be able to focus on those things that are super important. And so one thing I want to ask you about in the time that we have left, you've obviously given us, along with other users and customers, a lot of feedback, which we take really, really seriously, and we want to make sure we incorporate that. I could say that till I'm blue in the face, but it's more important if others hear it from people who are actually using the system on a daily basis. Can you talk a little bit about some of the improvements that you've seen in the platform and how those have helped you on the job site?
So sure. So from the very beginning, we obviously had an updated interface that brought us to more of a streamlined effect. We were able to we wanted to be able to see questions that we asked previously in an efficient manner. So along the left-hand side of your interface now, we're able to quickly and easily scroll, find different conversations that we had with the proper keywords. So that when we're going back, weeks, months later, saying, hey, where did I actually find that? I can quickly scroll down, get back to that conversation. We wanted to be able to carry on a conversation with the tool as well. So we ask a question and then it gets us, an answer, but then we have another question based on the answer that it came back with. So we're able to quickly and easily follow on, tag on another question and kind of capture all that inside of one major conversation. Which was very helpful. We had the document viewing screen. So right now, I think you have Adobe as your document viewer in there. So we wanted to be able to zoom and scroll through the document, and we wanted when we pulled up the document, we wanted it to take us to the right page away, the correct page, so we can see exactly where it's pulling the information from. So that's all feedback that we gave you that you and your engineers were able to very quickly implement, which ultimately helped us in the field. So
awesome.
I think the other component of this is the plus down or the thumbs up, thumbs down. That you have in there. I think our team has been very diligent with starting to use the thumbs up, thumbs down based on our reaction or our opinion of the response that it gave. And then your engineers and developers have been very good with kind of honing and crafting responses based on the feedback that we gave you.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. And I think tied to that, obviously you've had a unique vantage point because you were using the system and then members of your team reporting up through you adopted the system. And so you're able to kind of observe the learning curve and the process that they went through and trying to understand what does it look like to interact with a system that has access to the documents, that uses natural language processing. You can talk to it more like a person than you would a Google search, for example. So I'm curious, what would you tell other construction professionals like yourself that are skeptical about AI and the value it can provide in a construction context?
So that's a good one too, because there are a lot of construction professionals that are, of the old school thought at this point in time. I will say that I have turned a handful of them at this point.
You're doing the good work.
I am. I've become kind of the beacon on site. If people have a question, they don't know where to find it, and they say, "Oh, just go find Andy. He'll get it for you real quick," and we'll hop into trunk text and we'll pull up an answer and kind of wow them with, "Oh my God, where did it find that?" And it actually gave you a written response with context. Like, that's incredible. So it's been beneficial for kind of that old school generation, but even the new school too, that's coming in straight out of college. They don't have the experience that a seasoned engineer or superintendent has. It's very simple for them to just start typing in questions or typing in keywords and figuring out what different tags mean. The tool pulls information from the documents. If they don't know what a simple tag is on a mechanical drawing, it'll take them to the mechanical drawing. It'll take them to the table showing all the different descriptors for the tag. I think it's provided extreme value for everyone across all of our projects. And the more that we use the product, the more we're starting to figure out how to ask questions as well. It's the more broad the question, the more broad the response. Granted, sometimes you do want to do that because you do want to cast a wide net and see what comes back. But if you're looking for a very specific response, you need to be very poignant in your question and kind of lead it and say, "Hey, I'm looking for this in the specifications," or, "Hey, I'm looking for this in an architectural detail." And we've been fascinated by how the tool's been able to actually find what we're looking for. It's like a big game of search and hunt, and it's really fascinating what it's come back with.
Yeah, it's been interesting to observe how we've seen this transition of some folks who have been using it for a little bit longer. Their questions sometimes get more verbose over time. They're not just asking it to do one thing. They're asking it to first find something and then answer a specific question and then maybe do a calculation. So yeah, it's been really interesting to observe. But I appreciate what you said. I saw this advertisement that I'll flash up on the screen. Still makes me laugh. But I think it's just important for people to know that we don't view AI in any way as a replacement for the construction work that's happening, that truthfully, this is an opportunity to offload a lot of the administrative overhead and bureaucracy or even red tape associated with this to make the teams more effective. And I know, Andy, you talk about this quite a bit, that it's less about AI and more about people using AI that are really going to be the differentiator. So anything you would elaborate on that specifically?
Oh, I completely agree with that. Like I said, we have some older superintendents here that haven't completely bought into the process, but I have turned some. The few that I've turned are just itching to type in questions to this. It's almost like they've completely forgot that old school method, and they've become so much more efficient with being able to find documents that other people on the project, right? Your project engineers, your field engineers, they're putting in documentation into Procore and they're titling it something. Could be something random. You think that there's some sort of context to it, but these superintendents and us who are out in the field all day working don't necessarily have that context. So we use the tool to be able to get us to those proper documents. And these older superintendents who maybe aren't used to looking at all this documentation are now kind of learning to really dive into the documents. They're not afraid to get into the weeds anymore. Right. The hardest part for them was just kind of getting to the document, not analyzing the document, but just getting to the document. And now that they can get to the document, we're seeing maximum efficiency, increase in quality out in the field, and overall happier people because we're not
Yeah.
spending our time looking for documents.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I heard someone make a comment, actually, a customer, that there's so much documentation on construction projects that documentation has in many ways lost some of its value because it's so noisy. There's so much of it. And yet there's also this kind of legal requirement and necessity that documentation exists for all of these things. And so
Absolutely.
the comment that they made was that the having systems like this help elevate the value of documentation, because now if it's documented, that means it's findable to help, you know, in these specific use cases.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really interesting that collectively this can elevate the value of documentation in construction. Well, Andy, this has been super, super helpful and informative. Really, really grateful for your time. We've gotten several questions that have popped up. Some of my colleagues have answered some of these, but I'm going to read some off and then we can tag team answering some. So one of the questions was, can you upload BIM information? So I'll take that one. So we are currently experimenting with both BIM information as well as specific data coming out of Revit models and things like that, for example. So we had deprioritized BIM because as great as BIM is, we really value it and think it's an outstanding tool. We hear from most folks on the job site, including folks like Andy, that the BIM models are out of date the moment you break ground. And so it's not that it's not important. we just deprioritized it. So we'd love to hear more about how you're using BIM models and see if that may be something we can incorporate in the near term. Another question that somebody had on here was about, let's see, citing specific examples of the application in the field. Obviously, we've covered several of those, which is great. But then one about has the system helped with code compliance? So I'm curious, Andy, in your use case, did you all upload some of the codes into the system when you were using it in your context, or no?
So we didn't upload any codes into Procore. I will say that there was one instance when I was building a large feature stair in the atrium. I had a question on code compliant rise run based on the buildup that we had to put down on top of the stair.
Yep.
And I thought it would be this would be a great use case for me to see what they came back with, to see if there was anything in our documents.
Yeah.
And it actually did pull from, I think it was IBC, it's been IBC 2018, which is what our building was designed off of. And it pulled code compliant rise, run, and stair specifications.
Yeah.
That information, to my knowledge, wasn't in our documents, but it actually it pulled the IBC 2018 from one of our documents, and then could have gone somewhere else to figure out that actual information for the actual rise run criteria.
Yeah. Well, now you got me curious. I'll look into it. But we do tell some customers that they can include other data sets in there, such as code books and things like that. We've also had conversations with the International Code Council and things like that about integrating in. So happy to have some more conversations about that, because I think that's an interesting use case. Similarly, not the same, but similar, we do have several customers who are using this with their standard operating procedures as a business as a whole, so that you can ask questions that are pointed at the project documents, but then if somebody, for example, gets hurt on the job site, they can go in and ask, what do our SOPs say I should do when X happens, which can also help cover you from a legal perspective. So that's another interesting use case. A couple of other questions here. Looks like Adam's asking, how does the platform handle drawing and spec revisions? Is it looking only at current revision, or can you ask it about changes between the first and second version, for example? This is a great one. I'm happy to take this. So first of all, the system is designed to answer the user's question based off of the most recent information that we have. We'll still include some of the older sources in there so that you can go back and look at them. We're also talking about having a visualization of the revision history of documentation, so you can have confidence that the information coming back is reliable and up to date. As it relates to the differences between revisions, we can answer questions about the differences, but that's primarily going to be scoped to what is documented about the changes between them. We're not going to, quote, read a drawing in the sense that we can say, hey, there's no text reference as to what changed, but it looks like this door moved over 6 feet. We're not going to do that type of stuff yet. Definitely something that we're looking into, though. Another question was, do you provide training prompts? And so I'm going to answer part of this, and then Andy, I'm going to pass part of it to you. the way we treat prompts is that we don't want these folks who are in the field, like Andy, to feel like you have to become prompt engineers to be able to use the system. So you should be able to interact with it largely like you would interact with a person to ask a question or tell the system what you're trying to accomplish. We do give you, we kind of call them cheat sheets, if you will, of some specific use cases where the system will shine. And because it's based off of the data that we're given, we want to make sure we understand that first. So for example, if we're given daily logs, that allows us to do certain things from a prompt perspective that we wouldn't be able to do if we weren't given those. So Andy, I think to flip that over to you, when we were talking earlier about you bringing on some of your team members and they were starting to use it, what were some of the things that you coached them on how to get the most out of the system?
So number one for this is reminding yourself that you have this tool at your disposal, right? We've spent our entire careers in this mindset of, hey, oh, now I need to go look at this document. I have to turn on this filter. I have to go to this on the job drive. I have to go look here, talk to this person. So number one was, hey, we have this system at our disposal. We need to use it. Number two was we needed to kind of craft our questions and try to lead the system to the response that we're looking for, kind of like what we discussed earlier. But other than that, I mean, it was really as simple as if you can type a question into Google, you can type a question into here, and it's going to come back with something. So it really wasn't too much of a learning curve for myself or my team. Once we figured out how to ask the questions and try to lead the system, then we were off to the races.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we're trying to consistently improve that learning curve, both in the training process and also in making it very construction specific. Obviously, construction is full of acronyms. And so we're trying to ensure that when users are plugging in acronyms, the system actually understands what those mean and building out a dictionary for that purpose. So hopefully that will make it easier over time. Last question here, Raphael is asking, as an owner, if I ask my CMAR to use the software tool in my project, what is the cost? Great question. Happy to unpack that further. The variability associated with cost is primarily tied to the size of the project. We kind of use that as a proxy for the amount and volume of documentation that we need to process on our side to enable you and end users to be able to derive the most out of this. But I love this question because it kind of speaks to the vision of where we're going, which is that we want the system to be valuable for all of the stakeholders in construction, potentially in different ways. So for owners, for GCs, for architects, subcontractors. So we have some exciting things in the works about ways that we can facilitate some collaboration between those groups and make sure everyone is on the same page. So I'm happy to go deeper on a cost perspective, and we can connect after this. So I appreciate the question. All right, well, we'll close things out here. I've got this kind of final slide. Really, really grateful for the time with you, Andy. Thank you so much for carving out the time out of your job site. I'm sure they're waiting for you to get back so that you can keep them on track and on the rails. So really,
I don't know if you can hear the hammer drill, but they're keeping on track.
I heard it. I like it. So, well, thank you again. And for anybody who wants to get in touch with us, you can use this QR code or visit our website, trunktools.com, and reach out. We're more than happy to talk to you about what we're doing. And we've got a lot of stuff in the works that we're really excited about. So thank you all for joining. We'll have this recorded and then posted here in the next few days. So thank you so much for joining us. And Andy, we'll talk soon.
Awesome. See you.